Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Kurkowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast. Sam Miller, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing great, Michael. Happy to be here.
No, same. And I really appreciate you doing this. As I said off camera, I've been really pumped to see everything that you have put together with Proteus. So to have you on is a real honor. So I appreciate it.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm pumped to talk to you. Just seeing all the work that you've done with this company and this program with Proteus. I like probably many people was watching a documentary called Quarterback earlier this year, which was a blast, and saw Patrick Mahomes with his coach Bobby Stroop doing this interesting work with this rotational power program. And I was like, what is that? And then found out that is what you've built over time. And I'm sure it's been a nice, good jump of, in this time since the documentary came out. But this has really been a 7-year plus journey, from soup to nuts of building it up here. But what I loved about it as I was researching this, Sam, is I think so much in the fitness industry, we talk about where we want to go, the goals, the point B. What this has really seemed to do is really find out where you are at the moment, like where is your point A, so you can bridge that gap. So really looking at all the different assessments. I think that's such a powerful thing that we need to talk about more and more in the fitness industry, because goals are great, but if you don't know where you stand at this moment, then you have no idea the timeline of what it's going to take to get to that goal.
It's a really, really interesting observation. And I completely agree with you. It's like in order to understand not just where you're going based on goals, but how to get there, you first need to understand what are you capable of, right? Yeah. And where are you deficient? And, that's really where definitely a big part of where we focus is helping to rapidly make very informed decisions using new information that hasn't existed before as it relates to functional strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, like as when I first got into personal training and fitness, I came in through like the FMS system, so functional movement assessment, which is a great program. And it really, what I loved about just the assessment process was you give some calm and some clarity to the person in front of you. And, not just the general population person, but even the athletes who sometimes we think like this is what they do for their job. So we think they're so in the know, but they're still trying to figure out how to optimize it, and they don't know what direction to go. And they're looking for a coach or a program to clear out some of that clarity. And in Proteus, like the movements are really interesting. I'm curious to know more about the manufacturing and how you did, but the data of it, of like getting you all this information on not just strength, but really where your power is as well. Was that something right away that you wanted to make sure that you worked on, like back in the first prototype or so? Like, was the data really important to you to get this information out to people?
Yes, it's a great question. The data, I think, is probably the most important and one of and the biggest driver, I think, for for creating Proteus. And what we're really doing is, our kind of ultimate aim is to become the universal standard for both quantifying and improving physical strength and power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the realization that I had, or very early on in the journey, and this goes back more than a decade, was around this kind of critical void in data that exists in one of the most important pillars of human performance, which is physical strength and power, especially for functional movements. And if you think about, a lot of the great innovations that we've seen in the human performance space as it relates to whether it's body comp or cameras for biomechanics or wearables for sleep and recovery, I think we like to ask ourselves, like, what is the equivalent for physical strength and power? Is it how much can you bench or squat?
Right.
right? If that's the case, to me, that's a screaming problem. Um, Especially because it's not to say those movements are important. Specifically, the squat's a very important movement. Um, but we kind of live in a three-dimensional world and we move in three-dimensional space. And so
Hmm.
what we care about, what we should be caring about is your strength and power, right? So power being force times velocity, so your ability to generate speed um, against an opposing force for kind of multi-planar
Hmm.
triplanar, we say, movements that are functional and rotational. That's really unbelievably important, and in order to measure those things or those movements, you need to have force that you're moving against in three-dimensional space.
Hmm.
That's not something that exists before
Hmm.
Proteus. So what we did was we realized, this is way beyond just putting a screen on a bike or a sensor on a cable machine, which it's physically impossible to get this sort of information from, a rope, which is what a
Hmm.
cable machine is. We realized we need to create a new machine altogether that has a rigid arm, right? And for anyone listening, Proteus has this very unique form factor with this
Yeah.
carbon fiber tube that you kind of move in and out and and around. And what that allows us to do is we use magnets and magnetic particle breaks specifically to create like a force field, and which is constant force no matter what speed or direction you move. It's
Mm.
not something you can get from a cable machine. It's not physically impossible. So if you're moving, up, down, in, out, in a figure eight pattern, for example, you're being resisted almost as if you're underwater.
Okay.
And you can change the viscosity of the fluid, so to speak.
Mm.
So what this does is constant force. It provides two benefits. One is it allows us to be able to measure strength and power throughout an entire movement pattern because it's constant resistance for the first time ever.
Wow.
And
Okay.
we rolled that into a software product that like delivers these hyper time efficient and hyper precise
Mhm.
assessments and reports, these actionable reports that are shareable, which we can get into the details on that in a
Sure.
minute. And then the secondary benefit is that it's also a training tool. So this provides a unique stimulus that has huge benefits for being able to generate power and speed for multiplanar movements, for improving movement efficiency, for coordination and proprioception, um, and for stimulating the fascial system. So there's a really Proteus is it's its own animal altogether, but from a fundamental standpoint, the we took a very different approach compared to what a lot of the other kind of companies I think have done in the connected fitness space, which is just digitizing an existing piece of equipment. We created an entirely new equipment altogether to generate this new
Mhm.
data, right, to fill this gap in human performance data that is has a tremendous amount of traction and tailwinds in the market, and we very much can see the kind of a clear vision to Proteus on its way to becoming the universal standard that's ubiquitous.
Yeah. That analogy you used of moving through water, I think that's really interesting because that's what I was thinking of that. I couldn't wrap my head exactly around it when I was looking at a lot of the different motions that you do. But it's interesting because when you move through water, it's very good not only for performance, but the injury prevention side as well, because you're never overloading or overloading the progression too fast from there. So how did this all start, with this, Sam? Like, I mean, that's an amazing description that you just put in there, but was this the vision like right off the bat when you first got it? How did this first come about of you wanting to go on this journey?
Yeah, it's another good question. So I think I'll start answering that by saying like what we're doing in just if we zoom out for a second and we just kind of frame this a little bit, we are totally redefining how we quantify and improve physical strength and power moving beyond one-dimensional methods, right? And so the genesis of Proteus really started, I think, and was inspired by the idea that we want this entire field to evolve beyond one-dimensional uniplanar evaluation, right, and uniplanar training, right?
Mhm.
Knowing that um, tools to both quantify and improve three-dimensional movements are extremely limited on a number of fronts, we think in a critical fashion. So
Mhm.
going back, into the, it kind of goes all the way back to the early 90s. I was, I grew up outside of Boston, and I grew up playing every sport imaginable. My main sport was soccer, but I was, lived on, was one of those kids lived on a cul-de-sac, and
Mhm.
there were like 10 kids that were same age, and we were just outside 24/7 playing
Mhm.
sports. Um, got into pretty competitive into soccer, and had a series of injuries. Starting when I was 10 years old, I had a condition in my knee, very painful, called osteochondritis dissecans, and then that kind of cascaded into a sequence of other kind of, I guess, related injuries or strains, if you will. And basically from the age of 9 through 14, I was in and out of physical therapy and athletic training. Um, and I have a distinct memory on a number of fronts of walking out of a training session with a teammate who was, working to kind of overcome a very, very different deficiency, or, it used to be an injury, but it was a deficiency in a different part of his body, his back and his oblique. Um, and we walked out of this session with a sheet of paper that had the same training program on it. And that was like I remember, even as, like, I think I was 13 or 14 at the time, I was just was like, how is that even possible? I
Something's
think
not right. Yeah.
something's not right, right? So, what I realized was, this is not an issue with the, like, very talented trainers or physical therapists. This is an issue with tools and technology that provide information to make informed decisions that ultimately will allow you to kind of personalize a program for somebody. Um, so I had that kind of deep rooted frustration and experience early on in the early 90s. And then fast forward, a decade. I had just graduated from Vanderbilt. I studied economics and history. I was in a totally different career path. I was in construction management, engineering, building healthcare and life sciences, safety labs, and these large healthcare facilities. And then I went from there from engineering into sales and business operations, and even product design. And I had this was around the time that the quantified self movement was starting to emerge, and I was seeing it become really interested in biometrics. And
Mhm.
I then it kind of took me back to my earlier, days when I was a young athlete, thinking,
Mhm.
well, why are we not seeing this big revolution in um, strength measurement, right?
Mhm.
We're seeing, we're still doing these same movements and evaluating. And even you look at the NFL combine, even, where it's like, how many reps can you bench 225? I mean, it's
Right. Yeah.
who
And they all look away after like 30 reps because they don't
yeah,
care if you do any more afterwards.
who cares about this? Is not, it's irrelevant. But there are
Mhm.
some merits to that, like that is a movement to measure. And but as it relates to football, it's, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. So
Sure.
I think what I this kind of led to this realization of, like, okay, actually the reason that we haven't seen this advancement is because you need to build strength is your ability to move against a force. So if you're
Mhm.
trying to be able to quantify strength for a movement in three-dimensional space, or something that is dynamic or functional, you need force that is three-dimensional. And like I said earlier, that's not something that exists. So what I
Mhm.
realized was that needs to start with a new machine altogether. And I got inspired by a very brilliant concept that my dad had invented and spun out of MIT in the early 90s. And he developed this contraption, we used to call it the machine, in the basement of my house outside of Boston when I was growing up. And he was trying to develop a tool for simulating sport movements.
Mhm.
And it just didn't work. I mean, it was a brilliant idea that this, these like flywheel system, and the idea that you could have resistance in all directions, but he kind of didn't get he got resistance in two of the three directions, the third
Mhm.
being the really challenging one, which is based on the position of the arm, and you
Sure.
need computer systems. And I won't go into the technology
Mhm.
too much just yet, but that I realized if I can redesign that prototype, make that work, provide resistance in all directions, and then build software and data capture system around
Mhm.
it, that's what'll solve this problem. And so that's what I set out to do. I left my job in 2015. I bootstrapped Proteus for the first 18 months, and for the first couple of years was like 1 to 3 people. I was building machines myself with my own hands and driving
Mhm.
them around in a truck like a crazy person, trying to get anyone to
There you go.
try it. You get these little bits of, little taste of, okay, we got something here, we got something
Mhm.
there. And there's some moments that we started to realize, okay, something is really resonating with people. There's a lot of work to do, but
Mhm.
it's not quite there. And so built a, dozen, almost 2 dozen machines in the first 4 years of Proteus 1.0. And those are like really early adopter partners. And then we redesigned the entire thing to be the current model, which is Proteus 2.0. And we've grown, about 15 times in the last 2 years. And now we've got close to 400 partner sites in the US and
Mhm.
Canada. It's all B2B, so we
Yeah.
sell into across a number of verticals, but businesses, we like to say businesses that provide services to athletes. And that
Mhm.
means all ages and capabilities, because right now we have 75,000 users at those 400 sites that range in age from age 8 to age 98.
Wow.
And so it is a tool that has benefits, and it provides a value proposition for anybody at any level of capability or skill and any stage of health, in a way that is the unique versatility that's really unmatched.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's about as universal as you can get, 8 to 90. So that's a pretty good age gap there. What were the biggest struggles and the challenges early on from there? Was it the manufacturing? Was it the buy-in? I'm sure like, everybody's got a built-in skeptic of anything new in there. Did you come across a lot of that early on?
Definitely. I mean, that was I mean, there were so many challenges, and
Sure.
honestly, like for me, I've been doing this now almost 8 years. A barometer for progress for me is when old challenges seem easy. So it's,
Mhm.
it's like I like to say it's like you're making progress when you're discovering new levels of hard,
Yeah.
right? um, of which, so now we've got our own different problems now, right? That are around
Yeah.
growth and all that sort
Just
of
bigger
stuff.
problems, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
just bigger, different problems, and that's the name of the game. So, but early on, I think there's a couple of big issues that were a struggle, and the first was that to develop the the first kind of versions of it's very expensive,
Yeah.
very capital intensive, and there was only so much I could do personally. I mean, I had done quite well in my 20s, like, in a different career, and also I was always kind of a hustler of sorts. Like I had, when the economy crashed in 2008, I was in my early 20s. I figured out a way to borrow, a little bit of money, and went down and started buying up, like, condos that were dirt
Mhm.
cheap in South Florida, flying down to Boston, and
Yeah.
became like a landlord on the
Absolutely. Yeah,
side and
that's
flipping.
glass half full work right there.
Yeah, totally. So I just see opportunity. I love when, like I say, when the building's on fire and people are running out. I'm kind of like looking around and
Yeah.
trying to get there. So I was able to, like, fund some of it, but only to a very small certain extent. And then it was really just trying to convince based on just nothing more than really an idea and like a raw fish prototype, and trying to sell a vision to raise a little bit of capital to then take the next step, and
Mhm.
then and keep doing that. I did that for a couple of years. That was very, very painful. Beyond that, there was incredible technology challenges, right?
Yeah.
This is not, we've invented something that hasn't existed before. This is not like, it's a different type of pneumatic resistance on a cable machine, and it's or like a, I mean, this is its own hardware and software. It's a new frontier. And even I remember one of the biggest, we've got multiple patents on across the board on all of
Yeah.
this, but one of the big accomplishments we had was being able to just get this data. And this is this huge accomplishment. And then we faced the reality of like, well, wait, who cares? What do we do with this?
Right. Yeah. That's a big question,
We don't
right?
know we don't even know what it means. There's not a norm that
Yeah.
like we can compare it. Like people don't, there isn't a norm for your age. How much power should you be able to generate in a trunk rotation?
Right.
That's not information that exists. It should, but so we had this information, then we were like, well, we don't know if it's good or bad. Like we
Mhm.
actually have to. There was a series of catch 22s. Where it was like, to develop that product further, we actually had to have so much more data,
Mhm.
and to get the data, we had to develop the product further, right? And it was just this conflict the whole time. And so a lot of it was just I subscribed to the idea of if there's a will, there's a way. And so I would just like,
Yeah.
whatever it took to get information to just break down the next, barrier or hurdle. And a lot of it was, I had to do a lot of it with my own hands and a really excellent small early team.
Yeah, I mean, it's really admirable just because if you've ever been in manufacturing, you know how hard it is to build something that's not out there. But on the other side, if you've ever been in the technology world, knowing how to actually put that, so now you're putting both of these together
Yeah.
at one time from there. I mean, making it as challenging on yourself as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, going on from there. But what's because I see like it's such a free motion based movement in there. Was that the biggest challenge of making it so that it could just like be useful like in all different ranges of motion? Was that a big challenge?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, so yeah, I mean, there, first of all, you have the mechanical system,
Mhm.
right? So all the parts and pieces and the pulleys that are in these different stages. So we've got us, allowing for movement and side to side and up to down and in and out with all these different mechanical systems. That's part one. And making that feel balanced and reduce inertia, right? The first ones we developed, it was like it would pull you over,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like almost throw you
Right.
around. And by the way, it does, for anyone listening, it is not, Proteus is not robotic in the sense it will not move itself.
Mm.
So it's not, it's actually safer than a free weight or a cable machine. If you move it around and just let go, it stays there in space. So it is reacting and responding to your movement. The most challenging part, I think, of the development was creating a computer system basically that controls the physical components of this, specifically the magnetic
Mhm.
brakes, and being able to dynamically adjust um, the um, the resistance that each of them provide based on the direction that you're moving and how far the kind of how far you are away from the machine in
Mhm.
space. So like the arm is itself a lever. So the further you pull it out, like we have to know exactly where you are and then account for that in resistance to have it feel consistent because you have more
Mm.
leverage. There's incredible amount of mathematics
Yeah.
that go into that we had to figure out, all of which is very much buttoned up on the IP side
Oh,
of
I'm sure. Yeah. I'm
this.
sure it's hard because these problems you probably don't even know that they're problems until they come up at
Oh
times.
yeah, it's a new front. It was a and still is a new frontier, and then it's like you build it, you make that work, and then it comes down to like, well, it's got to feel right, and it's got
Right.
there's a, you know what I mean, that you have to get like the the feeling and the haptic down and so forth, and so that was a massive amount of trial and error. um and then from there it's like then building a software, there's a 27-inch touchscreen that you can mount on either
Yep.
side of Proteus. And so then building a software product and really an experience that allows you to know what you're doing and how, and then that produces information that can be used in these environments.
Mhm.
Our first client was a research lab, right? And now we're in uh, extraordinarily busy environments in
Mhm.
kind of mainstream commercial fitness where there are super high volume sites that are doing 1,000 sessions a month on Proteus, right? So it's got to fit into those environments and be able to be used by all these
Mhm.
different populations. And so it's been quite a journey getting there.
Yeah. Did you see this as both an assessment tool and a training tool, or did one kind of be more in the forefront of your mind first?
Great question. So it has always been both, which has actually created challenges for us because there's a lot of misconceptions about Proteus, and some of that is our own doing.
Mm.
Because as we're getting started, again, I think now we're at a place where no matter what training tools you have or you use, if you care about physical strength and you care about measurement, you have to have a Proteus. You can't, it would require 20 pieces of equipment in a lab, 3 hours a time to get 10% of what we produce in 5 minutes, right? So like the 20 pieces of equipment, 3 hours in a lab, probably with a PhD student to get 10% of what we produce in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So like right now we've got a billion data points, a great software product. The roadmap is insane. It is definitely primarily a measurement and assessment tool as the primary. And then while you might only get assessed on it every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on who you are and what you're looking to do, you're using it as a training tool in between. In the early days, though, before we had a software product that delivered, actionable information and reports, and we didn't have the data, we had to position it as a training tool primarily.
Mhm.
And that was actually the first kind of
Is that
set of
because people hate assessment tools?
well, it was actually, I think we didn't really have an assessment tool
Yeah.
because we didn't know what to do with the information and how to
Yeah.
deliver it to people because we didn't really know what it meant and how it was going to be used. And that was a lot of trial and error for years. What we found that was extremely encouraging from the very beginning is even without the assessment piece and that software as a training tool, it is unbelievably sticky. I mean, it's a new experience altogether. Some of our early adopters be our longest term kind of
Mm.
ambassadors today, who are addicted to it as a training tool. Some of them just use Proteus, but a lot of them just use it as a key tool in their toolkit, which is really
Mhm.
how we position it from a training perspective, is that it is a incredibly differentiated, powerful tool in your toolkit that delivers a fundamentally different type of workout experience. Depending on the population, whoever the population and their demographic is, your clientele, you will have significant applications for it that will be received very well by your clientele. But as a tool in your toolkit, as a measurement tool, it is the one all be all for being able to quantify physical strength.
Mhm.
And we can say that now. A couple of years ago, we couldn't say that because we didn't have the software developed far enough along to have it be usable in the field.
Yeah. What was yeah, because I was as I was talking about assessment, it's everybody always seems like they want to bypass it. And it's always a question, why? Well, because it takes time. When you want to go do something, you want to go right into the action step and not, tell someone who's really geared up to go after their goals to take a step back and let's actually see where you are. And that's why, I mean, everybody, myself included, has bypassed some things in assessment because people are really anxious and excited to get there. So as you said, being able to do this in a 5 minute type, toolkit versus have to put somebody through an hour or a couple hour process to get all this different data and interest there. That's a really easy buy-in. That's a very low, low yielding investment to go in and
Totally.
work with. So what was the biggest things that the early adopters were saying about it? I'm sure that the people like they were already experienced in the field of strength and conditioning, and then they saw this piece. What was it that they were saying early on about using Proteus with their clients?
Yeah. couple different things. So, I mean, we still say today that like our even partners that we bring on at this stage, we're really just getting started. So everyone that is working with us, these business owners, they're really pioneers, and I really mean that. I think that's true, just as it was, in the kind of early days. Um, I think there were two things um, were kind of the main draws for the earliest adopters. One was the we tend to kind of like attract a more cerebral group that sees the vision of, they tend to have experience of seeing a lot of different technologies come and go,
Mhm.
right? And you mentioned this earlier, there was absolutely a risk for us in my mind of being like, there's a lot of gimmicks in this space. There's a lot of stuff that comes and goes, same stuff, different color, whatever. Um, I was always conscious of being perceived as a gimmick just because we have such a unique approach on everything, and it looks different, and it's, you know what I mean? But it's one of the most legitimate, versatile technologies that's existed in this space. And so we took a very conservative route of saying, we're going to grow by word of mouth, and we're going to attract these early adopters that we're going to win them over
Mhm.
authentically, and they're going to naturally talk about this. It was kind of a big bet, and that's exactly what's happened, and that's what's led to our growth. The things that drew them to us, I think, were two things. One is being cerebral as they are, thinking about, I actually want to contribute I see Sam's vision, right? And I want to contribute almost as a partner to where this product is headed, because I see this is going to take over the world, right? Especially on the data side, what we can do with this information, what an unlock it becomes for
Mhm.
businesses when they're able to, in minutes, be able to understand, what does my client need to work on and
Yeah.
how do they compare, keep them engaged, keep them competitive, right? And then give them true prescriptive, hyper personalized programming that doesn't require expertise to produce, is a new concept.
Mhm.
So the idea of being a part of that for the early adopters and contributing to that was actually very, very interesting, including like helping us to try to make sense of the information, right? What are the norms? What does it look? What is normal for these groups to have?
Right. Mhm.
Right? So that's part one. But part two, I think, is a training tool. Um, the 3D resistance is what we call our patented resistance
Right.
load. It's constant in all planes and directions. It provides such a unique and valuable training stimulus and therapeutic benefit that is a lot of what people look for. So especially in the elite athlete side, a lot of what they have this, a lot of these athletes and the trainers understand this too. They've got this incredible awareness of their body and their capabilities. And what Proteus allows you to do is, because it's resisting you throughout an entire range of motion, including the
Mhm.
end ranges, it creates this neural experience that creates this incredible feedback loop as you're feeling your way through and strengthening the end ranges of the movement.
Right. Mhm.
And so there's this really like visceral sensation or experience that comes from this, that is what happened to be what a lot of these early trainers and early adopters were looking for their clients, right? And what we found is they started to adopt it and use it with these kind of broadening user bases, was that it provided value and benefits in different ways and for different reasons for all these different demographics and
Mhm.
populations. For example, young athletes that were learning how to safely move better, right? And produce force from the ground up and engage their core. Proteus naturally forces you to do that,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't cheat. There's no inertia, right? It's constant resistance and strengthening you throughout an entire range of motion, like a chopping type movement, right?
Mhm.
For the aging population, we were finding that um, 92-year-olds who it was unsafe for them to use a cable machine or a free weight, or they couldn't do
Mhm.
certain movements because of the tools. Proteus, being as safe as it is, allowed them to do those things and get that confidence back, right?
Mhm.
And move more efficiently. And for the elite athletes who were trying to develop a neuromuscular stimulus and improve rotational power and speed, which is the currency of sport,
Mhm.
it was very quickly kind of Proteus very quickly adopted as a training tool because it was just simply producing benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the body awareness aspect of it on the elite athletes. I can see that so easily. But also, as you said, like even like the older population, the simplification of doing it, everybody wants that. It doesn't matter who it is, like whether you're an elite athlete or you're coming up, in athletics, like everybody wants to simplify things down. And
Yeah.
I like that, just with the data aspect of it is so powerful because in the strength world, we know, oh, how are you getting stronger? Well, progressive overload. You're using 15 pounds today, you use 20 pounds the next week. Okay, that's kind of all we know, but it might be in different movements. The power development is something that I was always fascinated by. My friend Antonio Scolante, he's a researcher out in University of Southern California. He was doing some work with kettlebell swings of finding the right kettlebell to use by putting on a force plate,
Hmm.
because just because you can swing 100-pound bell doesn't mean that that's the best bell for you to produce power. So he was
Right.
using different ones. So you might be very strong, but your power is on a different level. So that's what he was using there. I see Proteus in a very similar way where the strongest, biggest, toughest kid, they might have the strength in the weight room, but power development is very different from there. There's an athletic component to it. And I saw from the work I see like Bobby Stroop's work that I was looking at, like that power development is so key in there as well.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely true. And you could say we say this all the time is like you can develop strength all day long, and foundational strength is absolutely critical to have, right? Foundational strength.
Mhm.
But then what, right? You need to be
Right.
able to use that strength to produce speed for different movements,
Mhm.
right? And that's where power comes into play, right? So if you are just and we've started to do this, part of our assessment piece is actually produces these force velocity profiling, right? So you want to train along this curve, and you want to shift this curve up and to the right, right? You want to be able to produce um, more velocity against more force, right? And you need to train all along this curve. Uh, and so if you're training at a lower load, you want to improve the velocity that you can move that lower
Mhm.
load, right? And then the converse is true. So what's really interesting though is like these are known, exercise science principles, right? Training along the force velocity curve is like it's an undeniable truth.
Yeah.
The challenge though is like, well, how do you know when you need to change training styles and what movements
Right.
to focus on? That's just simply unknown, and it's a lot of guesswork, and that results in a lot of cookie cutter type programming, or a lot of just default to like, all right, let's just do the sagittal plane movements and focus on getting those stronger. The
Yeah.
reality, though, is we've started to do these kind of macro data analysis because this is new normative data. We've a billion data points. Last year, we captured 100 million reps performed on Proteus systems.
Wow.
And it's new normative data from tens of thousands of users that are growing exponentially. And one of the things that we've started to look at is like, well, how does strength change as you age, right? And there's a lot of kind of like new exciting research, and I think just important discussion going on around longevity. And so it's one of the reasons we chose this topic to look at with this new data set. And we found that as we confirmed things like every 10 years you age, after your 20s you lose 10% of power across the
Right.
entire body, right?
Mhm.
That's sort of a known thing already. But the interesting thing that we found is you lose power for rotational and multiplanar movements 18% faster every 10 years you age than you do for the uniplanar basic movements, which tells you that as you get older, the movements that are most important to train are the multiplanar movements. And it's not necessarily about strength so much as it is about speed. So, for
Mm.
example, if you're thinking about um, as an older person, looking to, limit risk for, with fall protection, for example,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? What really matters is how quickly can you rotate to stop yourself from falling,
Yeah.
right? And so like it makes perfect sense why, and like those are the movements and those are the types of movements that are most deficient as you get older. These things are not known. And so with this new normative data that we have, we're starting to answer some of these questions. And it all comes back to you first need to get an assessment. And
Right.
it takes us 5 minutes. One of our standardized assessments is 17 movements in 5 minutes
Hmm.
across the entire body. And the most interesting thing we found is that no matter the demographic, almost every demographic that you look at, the movement that has the greatest deficiencies in strength and
Yep.
power are the rotational movements. The movements that need the least amount of strength type training are the sagittal plane movements,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it totally makes sense because unless you continuously play baseball or you're doing racket sports or something like that, it's not it's not looked at. Like you can go to most, gyms right now and nobody's really doing powerful rotational based movements unless they have a coach or a trainer who's really big into that, but it's not like a norm of starting a new program or getting in. So it totally makes sense that that one plane of motion, that transverse plane of motion, it's going to depreciate. That's a fascinating stat though, that it depreciates that much faster than the
Oh
other
yeah.
ones.
Yeah, we've got a great white paper on this too. And we just started to work with uh, this hasn't been announced yet, but Dr. Andy Galpin,
Mhm.
um, if you're familiar with him, and there's
Yeah, I
some,
love his work. Mhm.
he's brilliant, and there's some really exciting stuff that we're kind of working on around the kind of the longevity space. But this kind of we're really just getting started with what, because we're measuring a lot more than just strength and power too,
Yeah.
and acceleration and deceleration and linear range of motion and consistency of movement in three-dimensional space and work and intensity, all that sort of stuff. But the reason we don't show it or feature it on the screen yet is because for a lot of those other proprietary metrics, we've got a ways to go with turning it into digestible, actionable information. Like
Hmm.
nobody cares about more data unless you're a
Yeah.
research lab or a sports science team within a pro organization, right? Like
Mm.
you need to be able to use it, right? Make sense of it immediately on the spot. And that's what we've done with the power and acceleration data. It is incredibly interesting, and these reports that Proteus generates, which give you exercise recommendations by body area, by velocity range to train at. There's
Mhm.
VBT kind of principles worked in there. You can share those reports by email or scan the QR code, and it pulls it up on mobile. Some of our sites charge anywhere from $50 to $150 for a 10 to 20 minute Proteus test and a little consult.
Yeah.
And they'll use it as a standard assessment tool. And in some cases, it's starting to replace the FMS, which we think the FMS is a great thing.
Mhm.
Um, but it's cumbersome, as you know, and it's doesn't takes a lot of time. It produces different type of information and data, a
Yeah.
lot of
Mhm.
expertise required. What we're trying to do is make this as turnkey as possible, where you bring in strength evaluations into your facility by getting Proteus. You deliver these assessments or the reports to your entire client base. Whether you monetize it directly or not, that's up to the business to decide. We see that happen a lot, but if it's not being, whether it's worked into the current rates, or there's
Yep.
a rate adjustment across the board, or they just are using it to attract and retain. We see all the above. So there's a huge ROI element to this that we found has been really exciting, especially for businesses that are looking to expand their premium services. Is an unbelievably
Right.
powerful tool, but it has benefits for the entire client base, no matter the demographic.
Yeah. No, I think like movement assessment is so powerful because you can do it very quick and you can get a good idea of it, but it can also be very limited with different people who are very deconditioned or also elite athletes who are very good at cheating their movement. They can make it look really good. Go work with some gymnasts. You'll see some of the most beautiful movement assessments, and they are broken.
Yeah.
But so to have the strength and power assessment in there as well, I think is so powerful from there.
Yeah.
That 17, that like kind of 17 part test that you do where it like takes 5 minutes from there. What is the data like telling someone when they get into there? Like, is it this is normal range? This is where you need to work on from there? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have so we've got a library of standardized tests that some of them, the 17 movement one is one that I just brought up as we have
Mhm.
a general power test, right? And it's a lot of it's a combination of that one's a combination of uniplanar and biplanar and triplanar movements. So things from a horizontal press into a row and the trunk rotation plyo and non-plyo and a lateral lunge and a single leg squat. And I think that one even has a jump in it.
Yeah.
So a lot of some basic movements and then rotational and multiplanar with chops, et cetera. I mean, and you can there's infinite versatility on Proteus. So whatever movement you want to do or test, you can do it on Proteus, which is
Yeah.
that is very unique. Um, you can also create your own tests, and we actually have a tier on the software side that allows you to not just create your own tests, but it produces shareable reports that have your own branding on them, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that can be done in minutes. Um, so what it does is you go through this and you can test up to 10 individuals at the same time. So if it's in these busy environments, but if you're just doing a one-on-one, you're done with a standardized test in anywhere from 4.5 to 6 minutes. And immediately it's going to tell you overall high level, you did all these movements. On average, are you improving in power and acceleration, right? Or where are you, right? Are you improving overall? What's your Proteus score? Proteus score is power per pound of body weight, which is one of the most interesting new metrics that we have. It's about power efficiency, basically, right? Your ability to generate power based on your size. And when you think about force velocity profiling and different athlete types, I'll just say this: the highest Proteus score you've ever seen is like a 130-pound female field hockey player.
I was gonna say it kind of goes pound for pound from there. Like you
It's
can
like a
really see
power
the
packet.
differences.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's how much power she can produce, which is a lot,
Yeah.
especially for her size, right? Um, and then we've got then immediately what you do is you set the cohort filters, which basically means you designate, you do this usually one time, but you can change it dynamically. Who do you want to compare yourself to, right? So you can adjust what demographic you want to compare yourself to against our cloud database, right?
Mhm.
So age, sex, height, weight, sport, if there is one, position, even skill level. So
Mhm.
you could say, I want to do a test and compare myself if pro golfers have done a test. So I want to compare myself to pro golfers, or I want to compare myself to males that are 30 to 40 years old,
Yep.
right? You would and then it contextualizes all the results and recalculates percentiles for all these metrics for every movement you did based on how you compare to whatever demographic
Mhm.
that you're looking, right? And we show sample sizes too, because we're a lot of some of this you might do an obscure movement in a test and we might be like it's the sample size of 2, so you make the decision if that's important. Normally for our standardized test there's like 10,000 people
Sure.
into whatever, but just as an example, this is a new frontier. So you immediately are seeing, okay, how do I stack up across all these movements I did and overall? Am I improving? And then you get into the insights. And the insights is when it starts to show you, okay, based on the movements you did, what does that mean you need to focus on for training? So, for example, you might finish a test that involved some of the movements I just talked about: a press in a row, and a plyo and a non-plyo, trunk rotation, and a lateral lunge, right? Just
Yep.
example. It's going to tell you, just as an example, it'll tell you, okay, your lateral lunge is low power. You need to be training strength specifically and here are the recommended exercises that we say you do on or off Proteus, and you should be training basically at a load level that at max effort you're within 0 to 0.75 meters per second,
Mhm.
right, from a velocity standpoint. And then it'll say for trunk rotation you are strength dominant, right? So that would mean you are stronger than you are fast. We see this a lot. So your
Mhm.
deficiency is on the speed side, specifically acceleration. And we'll say we recommend doing these types of movement, a banded type movement at um, 1.5 meters, 1.25 meters per second or higher, right? Or med ball toss,
Mhm.
right? And then it'll break down based on all the body areas you tested. What are the implications? What are the recommendations? And it is a cheat sheet for trainers to be able to say, well, now I know what's going to influence a program that I'm
Yeah.
going to give this person. And when I retest, we're going to see how things have changed. And we're starting to, the next step is that this is starting to get even, I don't want to spoil too much, but even more prescriptive, um, and uh, programmatic, bringing in more automation
Mhm.
tools that help with the existing workflows of a lot of these businesses to basically make programming decisions automatically at a hyper personalized level.
Mhm.
That is a massive shortcut that benefits all the members and clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this so much. I love the work of, anytime we take something that is normally subjective and can make it objective data on there, I think it's just going to serve people so much. And coaches, I think they can get into their own rut of like, I like doing these things, and we kind of steer towards that. But it's like when you really look at who's the person in front of you and giving them as much data as possible, like data is so powerful, and when you can see it of like, this is where you're strong, this is where the deficiency is, that clarity of mind that you can give somebody, it builds confidence in that person. And I had, Joel Cochran, I, just recently out on the podcast said like our first job as coaches is to inspire confidence in somebody. So the more things that we can do to give somebody that, I think is so powerful. And what you guys have done with Proteus and what you've worked with is, this, I see you guys have got all your ducks in a row of all these different measures. I know it's taken a long time to get there. So huge props to you. What's next on the docket for you with it? Is it just more exposure of what you have? Is there more things that you're working on kind of behind the scenes on the horizon? Or
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think there's two kind of primary focus areas for us right now going forward. The first is, um, we're trying to drive awareness and understanding and market education about what Proteus is, what it does, and how it's used, right? And we like to do that in the form of, um, hear from other users, or owners like you, right? That's how it's most authentically
Mhm.
communicated, right? Is when we're really focusing a lot on content and storytelling of, leveraging the incredible success of a number of our partners and that are business owners, of how they've been able to change the course of their
Mhm.
business positively as a huge enhancement or accelerant to growth, prestige, if that's kind of a motivator for them, profitability, of course, and so forth. So getting more of those stories out there and getting more awareness and an understanding of Proteus is definitely one of the biggest objectives, considering that we now have so much, not just social, but scientific proof,
Yeah.
about why this needs to exist. Now it does. Here's how it's being used. This is a real solution. And, um, this is, this is the future, we believe, of this space without question. And not to, again, I will say, I said this earlier, as a training tool, for example, it's a tool in your toolkit. We are not the kind of company that comes out and says, we've been training wrong all
Yeah.
these years, and you just use Proteus and it's going to solve all your problems. That's,
Yeah.
anyone that says that is insane, right? The things that our partners and this market are already doing, there's a lot of really, really great stuff. You add Proteus to the mix, it's going to basically, it's a 1 + 1 = 5 situation.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing, I think, aside from a kind of general awareness, is on the product roadmap. So as we're getting into kind of these more mainstream markets with the kind of a broader user base, um, and we only, Proteus is often perceived as like, this is a tool for professional athletes. Like, that's a 1% of our user base. And yes, we do have Patrick Mahomes, John Rahm, Damian Lillard, Justin Verlander,
Yeah.
some of the best athletes in the world across all sports who are users of Proteus. But that's a small sliver of who's using it. But for these businesses that we work with, is really evolving the software so that it continues to be not just usable, but a major enhancement for even a novice trainer
Mhm.
to be able to implement right away without any expertise or training, as partly as a way to help standardize for a lot of businesses we work with the protocols that they have in place or want for their business. Like, this is how we want to do assessments at this business or location, right? Oftentimes it's a big burden to be training new talent and trainers on how do I bring them up to speed on what we do and how do we do. So this is a tool that helps you standardize that by just saying, just run them through this test.
Yeah.
And it's going to give you the information that, it's not just going to be incredibly motivating and insightful for the client and the member without you having to really do anything.
Yeah.
But it's also lets a novice trainer use this information as if they're like, it doesn't require a sports science degree. So we're focusing on really doubling down on those tools that make Proteus truly, truly turnkey for these businesses, including a large expansion to this already existing community platform that we've developed that allow, there's a location finder map. We're trying to funnel, new kind of members and prospects to our partner sites. We have a community portal, a Proteus trainer certification, ROI resources, playbooks, office hours, marketing materials. You want to know, how do I communicate Proteus to this population? We literally have turnkey, take this digital flyer, here's what you put into an email, all that sort of stuff that's like, to really help these businesses leverage Proteus and get max value.
Yeah. I think this is so great, Sam. I really love what you guys are doing. I love innovation, but when innovation is combined with social proof and getting better on a day-by-day basis, like, that is super inspiring. So many people have an idea of stuff, but just want to throw it out there. But the due diligence that you've done of working with this and putting a tool like this together, I think this is fantastic. So, Sam, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really loved hearing everything that you're doing. I'm pumped to work on this stuff myself, of diving into it. So thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure. I really appreciate it, Michael. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. If people want to know more about Proteus, kind of check it out more for themselves, what's the best place that we can direct them?
Yeah, two areas. If you're on Instagram, at Proteus Motion is one of the best resources for like content and seeing how it's used and so forth. That's at Proteus Motion. And then our website, of course, there's a form. If you go to our website, proteusmotion.com, you can submit a form, tell us a little about yourself, and one of our product experts will be happy to talk. We highly, highly recommend meeting with one of those experts to actually get like a live, very short virtual demo of the software, because 100% of the time it is guaranteed that you will learn something that you did not know about Proteus, how it's used, and it's always eye-opening. So we highly, highly recommend doing that.
Perfect. Awesome. Sam, thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Listeners, thank you so much for connecting. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait. Go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.